back with another episode of Pinal's People. Our guest today is none other than Harold Christ, the owner of the Windmill Winery in Florence. Christ also served as the president and CEO of Pinal Partnership for 7 years and has been actively involved with a number of other community organizations in Pinal. We are thrilled to get to discuss some of those things with him today and to have him on the show. Harold, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. To get the ball rolling on our conversation today, I think it's safe to say that a lot of people recognize you as the owner of a very remarkable venue out here in Florence.
Thank you.
And something our viewers might not know, though, that I would love if you could kind of elaborate on and share a little bit about, is your history of the development out in Gold Canyon.
Okay.
Can you share a little bit about that project?
Sure. I was doing some developing in the East Valley, in Mesa area, in the early 70s. And so I was always intrigued with the desert in and around where Gold Canyon is today. Dinosaur Mountain kind of reminded me of old John Wayne movies. And you had the saguaro cactus and the cowboys, and it was just a really special place. So I began assembling that with a group of investors in the early 70s. We started to come to Pinal County for the zoning of the property in the 1973-74. That was the first Arab oil embargo. So now we were a long ways out of town, and there was little concrete ribbon streets that were Broadway and Southern and so forth, and that's how people got out there. So when you couldn't get gas, we really had to pull in the horns, and we waited till 1980. We began building the golf course in 1979, 1980. And that golf course is just a fabulous place if you enjoy golf. It's very unique, very different. We built the resort in and around some ideas that we got from an architect named Bob Fairburn. And Bob was very well recognized around the valley. And a lot of people don't remember this, but we painted it white. We painted it white on purpose because we needed a bold architectural statement. We had a friend who had a plane, and we flew down to Mexico, and we went over some of the resorts and so forth down there. We saw some beautiful white buildings. We brought that idea back, and we painted them white. That was controversial because everybody likes those, not everybody, but a lot of people were into desert tones and so forth. But it stayed that way for a long, long time until a group of Canadians came in and bought the property, and they have since repainted. So it was a 1,630 some odd acre endeavor. There's really no land left there to develop at this point. Lyle Anderson did the Superstition Mountain on some property that we had at one point, and it's just become a very, very unique, special place. Mm-hmm. So we really enjoyed doing that, and that's how I really got acquainted with everybody in Pinal County, because Florence being the county seat, we were down here quite often. And actually, the zoning for that particular property was in one of the buildings that's, of course, still here in Florence. And after we got the zoning, the chairman of the zoning board came up to me and said, "Harold, we gave you a sympathy vote for approving this." And I said, "Well, sir, what does that mean?" And he said, "We don't think you'll ever do this, but we voted to let you do this and go ahead." So we've had a lot of fun with him since he's since passed away, which I regret. But we had a lot of fun with everybody at the county doing that.
Mm-hmm. Gold Canyon, it's become one of the most recognizable parts of Pinal County. Everybody sees the superstitions.
Yeah.
It's kind of really well known. And as I understand, you were mentioning the resort. I understand there's a connection to Kenny Rogers as well. Is that correct?
There was. That was a story that Kenny Rogers was doing one of the Gambler series. It was 3 or 4. And he and Dolly Parton was going to be part of that. And so his staff called and said, "Hey, he's going to be doing a Gambler series at the old Apacheland movie studio," which was just a couple of miles from the property. And of course, to us, that meant they're looking for free accommodations. But to get Kenny Rogers there, to have that, it was well worth it, we felt. So if you remember the white buildings, he was doing Islands in the Stream was the album that he was going to do, which he and Dolly sang together. So we're waiting for this. They came, shot the pictures for the album and whatnot, and we're waiting for it to come out. So one day we get this envelope from his people, they were in Atlanta, I believe, at the time, and they said, "Hey, we're sending this to you. Here it is." So we opened it up, and it had Kenny standing in front of one of those white walls. No mention of Gold Canyon. It had nothing. Nobody would have ever known where it was taken. It could have been taken at the White House, you know, for all intents and purposes. But it was a lot of fun to go through that, and then to meet them and to meet Dolly Parton and so forth as part of that was fun as well. So it's kind of like the old adage, you know, there's no bad publicity. You know, you get you know, something out of it, and whatever means it will be.
And so, you know, having done what you've done in Gold Canyon, I know you kind of touched on this a little bit before with Florence. You had mentioned a little bit about, you know, why you came out to Florence, but, you know, what made you think the next big project would be a winery out in Florence?
Well, this is, I'll try to do a Reader's Digest version of this because it is a long story. A good friend of mine really was the person who started Country Thunder and got it down here. And so he and I had become acquaintances over the years and enjoyed one another, and he was beginning to bring the big acts into Florence. And at that time we had bought the barn, which is sitting right behind us here, in Wisconsin. It was built in 1910 in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And so he's driving by one day and he sees we're getting ready to put this building up. He says, "What are you doing with that?" And I said, "Well, it's going to be part of," because we started the winery here as a plant nursery, because in the development business at that time things were going so quickly that you couldn't get enough plants and so forth. There were great water rights on this property, so we started as a pretty good sized nursery. And so I said, that building is going to be part of the nursery. It would be a kind of a point of sale, you know, to do that. He said, "Well, why don't you do weddings in there?" And I said, "Gosh," I said, "why don't you do weddings out at Country Thunder?" He says, "Oh, I like to do big things. I don't want to, buildings be perfect for that." So that's what started the idea of it. And when it really was about the time of the Great Recession, when that hit, if people couldn't make a house payment, they weren't buying trees and shrubs and plants. So because of what my friend had mentioned to me of doing weddings, we went to the first bridal show, and if you'd have told me at some time in my life I would be going to a bridal show, I would have told you were crazy. So here we go, and we had a rendering of what we were going to do here, because all we had was a barn kind of going up and almost ready. And in that rendering, we didn't say where it was, because we wanted people to ask, "Where is this?" and so forth, and we could explain Florence better that way. So it said Weddings, Winery, and Events. That was the heading on this rendering. And so these young ladies, if they had a groom with them, they'd be walking around and say, "Oh, gosh, winery. I've always wanted to get married in a winery." So didn't talk about weddings, didn't talk about events, but the winery was the big buzzword that kept emanating from people. So we started, as we got this open and whatnot, we began to do weddings. We started doing wine tastings, but we used California wines, Washington wines, and we got a lot of great help from people in doing that. But I just hated doing that. I wanted to do Arizona wines, and frankly, Arizona wines were not very good at that time. If you were tasting wines back then, most of the Arizona wines would not be something that you would particularly enjoy. So, not being as smart as I look, which I know you've already figured out, I thought we can grow grapes here and we're going to make some great wine. Now, there is a Greek monastery, as you know, about 6 or 7 miles from here, and there's a Father Manaus who's there. So I went out to see Father Manaus because he's growing grapes and so forth, and I said, Father, what do you think? We're going to go. He says, I don't know, I don't think you can do that. And others said, that's not going to work. And I said, oh, I bet we can. We'll do some shading, we'll get it. And to make a very long story short, we planted about 8 or 10 varietals of grapes. We did really good with raisins because it got so hot so fast, it turned those grapes to raisins before we could ever, no sugar wouldn't set. It was just, so all that effort and work that we put in, we really only ended up with one varietal that we could produce here. It's called a Barbera. It's an Italian grape that is very heat tolerant. So we grow it here. The rest, we have a joint venture with a vineyard in Wilcox. So Wilcox has a higher elevation, cooler evenings, and that's where we produce and bottle our wines. And that's what really got us into the Arizona wine business. Mm-hmm. And we still sell other wines and so forth, but that was the real lead in. And people, I think people want local things. They're looking for that local that local type of product, and so we've tried to meet that need. So we have 15 different varietals now that we produce, and we produce, we think, some pretty good wines. Mm-hmm. So people seem to enjoy them.
So tell me a little bit about your work with Pinal Partnership. How did you get involved in that, and what made you want to get involved?
Well, Pinal, there had been a need. I had been involved back in the Gold Canyon days with the East Valley Partnership and the founding of that, because what was happening in the East Valley was when you hit the river at Tempe, everything stayed on the west side. Nothing to promote Tempe, Chandler. I mean, it's hard to believe today, but there just wasn't any help coming from Maricopa County. And so that was the impetus for forming the East Valley Partnership. And so the step then in forming the Pinal Partnership was a lot of the same thing. A lot of things were not happening in Pinal County that should be happening and could be happening, except there was no voice out there. There was nobody to really promote it and push it and so forth. So with the help of people like Jordan Rose and those who jumped in and really put this together, that became a strong voice for so much of what has transpired and happened in the county. And I was at the stage in my career where they had asked me if I would, Sandy Smith had been the first president and CEO, and Sandy and I had kind of grown up together in that far East Valley, Apache Junction, Gold Canyon area. Our kids had gone to school together. And so as Sandy was retiring and so forth, I then stepped into that position for those next years. Mm-hmm. But it's a wonderful organization that has done a lot to help promote what is going on today, and to help. There's so much going on. It's just hard every day. I mean, you see it probably more than I do at this point, but the opportunities are just unlimited. But it's the old adage, you want quality growth. You don't want just any old thing to happen. And I think that's always the deterrent to people who want to see progress and want to see things happen, that they then begin to see, I hate to say it this way, but you begin to see in some areas, Phoenix certainly has it, other areas have, you see kind of tomorrow's slums begin to be developed and built. And that's not what you want. You want to have something that provides employment, something that provides the right proper housing and so forth for people, and you want to provide recreation and entertainment and so forth. It's a multifaceted product that you need to be putting out there. Mm-hmm. So that's so much of what I think Pinal Partnership is capable of doing, because you get new people coming to town. not just looking for residential opportunities, but the business communities coming and looking for, why should I relocate here? And look at the type of things that we're getting now, with LG and Lucid, and all the guys that are doing wonderful things. So
yeah. And did you ever think, back when you first started serving with Pinal Partnership, did you ever think that things were going to get to the point that they have today, where?
And I certainly don't mean this egotistically at all, but I've always been a dreamer. Okay, I'd love to dream the dream, and then to be able to implement that dream, and to have other people share their dreams with me, and we put those together. And so, I can't sit here and say that I felt we'd see the size of some of these things that are coming in, but I always felt, this was going to be the landing spot. Maricopa County is just overgrown. Tucson is has a different constitution to it almost, as far as the type of growth they have. Pinal County is in the perfect spot. It's just the ideal landing spot for so many of these companies who are looking to bring, and even for their employees, to bring their employees to a place like Pinal, as opposed to going into the depths of Maricopa County. It's very significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Harold, we have one last question for you.
Okay.
And we've made it our mission to ask everybody this question that's been on the show this year.
Uh-oh.
So I'd love to get your perspective on it. So let's imagine it's 20, 30 years down the line, and you've done all you've wanted to accomplish. You mentioned you're a dreamer. You've done all you've wanted to accomplish with the winery. You've seen all the great things that projects like Pinal Partnership have been able to achieve. And it's time for you to pass on the torch to the next generation. And of all you've learned with all of your experiences, whether it's Gold Canyon, whether it's out here in Florence, and all the projects you've done, you can only leave behind one lesson for the next generation. What would it be?
It's funny you ask that question, because it's the cliche, which I have never really appreciated. People say, "Gee, that's a great question." It gives them time to think of the answer. But I have always felt I want to pass along a work ethic to the next generation. I want them to understand that this doesn't all happen by magic. It's an ethic that is instilled in people. Some people get it from their parents. Some people get it from their first jobs that they have, and so forth. And we hire some young people along the way that we use as barbacks and different parts of the community here. And the idea is to have them leave here with that work ethic that somebody else is going to appreciate and take advantage of. So I think that's the big thing that I would like to leave the next generation.
Awesome. Harold,
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was lovely having you on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.